definitely storytelling, filmmaking, photography is something that can be used in HCD. And this is because it is, in my experience, something that has been able to help me understand user experience.
Welcome, everybody. Today we have a new interview, a new session of the Proportion Global Community. And this time we go all the way to Kenya and speak with Josemarie.
Hi, my name is Josemarie. I am a visual artist from Kenya. Yes, and I'm really happy to be here.
Wonderful. Today we will talk about storytelling. Can you shortly tell first your own personal story before we get into the topic itself?
Yes, as a creative person who loves to see the world through creativity, storytelling is something that over the years has become a big part of my life because it helps me to understand, number one, where I come from and where other people come from. And this can be through photography, which is something that I do. How do I use photography to tell a story? How can I write a poem that tells a story? How can I paint something that tells a story? So one of the biggest influences for me with storytelling is how it helps you to come out of what you know of something or somewhere or someone to seeing it through their eyes.
So Josemarie, I read about your career so far, and you've been in photography, in videographing, but you also have another background study, right? And can you tell a bit about that and why you try to combine those two worlds?
Yes. So one of the things that I got really interested in growing up is understanding why there are so many differences in the world, especially as a young child, watching the news with your parents or anyone, or like reading the newspaper and seeing, you know, there's so much conflict that happens, whether it's like in politics, in communities, or even just between two individuals. I grew up wanting to find out why it happens. And so I went on to do my first degree in peace and conflict resolution, which really helped me understand where conflict comes from, where peace comes from, knowing that there's, you know, positive peace, positive conflict, negative conflict. And this was a really firm foundation for me to understand humans as we are, and how that translated into storytelling is I got interested in one main unit that we did, which was in Refugee Studies. And it was in that time where the lecturer was talking about, say, having 600,000 refugees in one of the camps in Kenya. It got me confused because I was like, how do we have so many refugees, yet I've never met one, and I live in a host community? So it was in that time that I decided to do my internship at a refugee organization. And on the first day, I met 20 different refugees from different parts of East Africa. And it was mind-blowing because they all had very different reasons as to why they fled their country. And one of the biggest struggles for me at the time was talking to people and saying, oh, I started an internship, and guess what? Like, I met somebody who went through this crisis or this conflict back home, and they had to come here. And having that kind of conversation with people was really hard because I couldn't explain it in a way that I could see them empathize or I really understand where I was coming from with how I was feeling. And at the same time, I was doing a lot of reading on refugees, watching films, watching documentaries. And it was The Good Lie, a really good film about 5 Sudanese, Southern Sudanese children who had to, you know, migrate and come to Kenya, and they walked through Ethiopia. And that definitely made me understand better what it feels like to leave your home, like, and start afresh. And I watched that film with my parents, I watched it with friends, and it was at that time when I started seeing how they responded to the film. You know, they were empathic, they would cry, they'd actually come out of themselves and go, oh wow, this is not just something that happens. You know, it's like you can read about it, but when you're able to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who is going through that situation, it really helps you understand. So at the time, I started seeing how storytelling could really change how we see the world, and especially narratives that we're not introduced to, or narratives that we don't really understand. And as somebody who comes from a, say, host community environment, it was really important for me to be able to spread that kind of narrative. So at the time I decided to do an honors degree in cinematography, because that's when I started seeing the influence storytelling would have on changing people's lives, or changing perspectives, or shifting the narratives of something that we know. And so I did my thesis on how we can shift the perceptions of host communities towards refugees, to help people just understand better and be more empathic and be more welcoming to difference, or yeah.
I can really imagine that video and film is super powerful, but the example you gave, The Good Lie, probably is highly qualitatively produced, right? It had really good documentary makers, really good cameramen and women. So it's an art to tell a story, or not? Is it an art to tell a story? And maybe let me just give a context. I mean, this is a community of human-centered designers. We all want to be better at empathizing with the users we design for. So my question really relates to, is the art of storytelling and making film something we can also do as amateur videographers? Like, can we just take out our camera and apply the technique of storytelling on video, even when we are not trained to be a videographer?
Yes, definitely storytelling, filmmaking, photography is something that can be used in HCD. And this is because it is, in my experience, something that has been able to help me understand user experience. So whenever I'm doing an interview with someone, whether it's a video interview, a photography interview, where I'm basically watching somebody do something and I document that in a picture or in a video, I've really been able to come out of my understanding. So especially when we go into, say, a community and maybe we want to document the impact, or maybe we want to understand where we can improve on a project, it always, I feel, the biggest and the best response comes from the person. So, you know, when you go into a situation and you want to solve a problem, I think being able to take yourself out of context of what you think could be the solution, to seeing what the person is experiencing so far and how they feel they need to be supported, is something that I've seen has had a really great impact through storytelling, because it's interviewing someone, it's watching them respond, it's hearing how they felt about maybe a change that came to them and how they feel they would need support. So I find in HCD it would definitely work, because it could be leaving, I'd say, users or the beneficiaries of something with a camera and saying, document how this project started for you and how it's going so far. One case that I want to use is a documentary called Thank You for the Rain, which is about a man in Machakos, drier part of Kenya, who meets with this Norwegian filmmaker. And so she's coming to document, the impact of climate change in his community. And she gives him a camera, and he's able to document every stage of that process, and seeing, like, coming from a community, number one, that there's not so many trees. He's somebody who's inspired and understands the importance of planting trees. And you can definitely see his struggle when he's trying to, like, communicate to the people in his community to tell them, plant more trees, plant more trees. And they're like, well, we could do that, but then at the same time, we need to, like, make food. We need to earn money. And so his experience through his own eyes, with a simple camera, documenting, like, his daily life with his family, with his kids, and then sharing that with her. And then at some point he manages to go to Norway, and also he is able to see climate change in a different part of the world. That was something that made me think, oh wow, like, storytelling really does help us understand the user experience more than, like, us going into a space and documenting what we can document. So how can they also tell their own story in their own way, as opposed to, like, maybe I want to take a picture in this way, but this is how they see it. Yeah.
Right. So maybe we can come down to a couple of practical tips and tricks also for human-centered designers, because my first assumption was when you told about using film when doing interviews, is that as an interviewer, you would also start recording. And well, it's also pretty intense to have a camera on your face, especially if you are being interviewed. You are probably from a poor setting, and you are expected to share your poverty related story in order for us to understand how we can contribute to solve that. So it's pretty intrusive to use a camera and to put someone on the spot, literally. But now you share the story as a tip, like don't film yourself, ask them to film themselves. Is that the default mode, that you ask them to self-document, or is it you who document, or do you have other alternatives? So what are your practical tips for human-centered designers?
First one, where I say I'm interviewing and the camera is right in their face. The first thing that I always do is create a friendship, create a relationship, as opposed to like going in, setting up a camera and putting it, in front of somebody's face. The first thing is gaining the trust of somebody. So how are you going into someone's space? And of course, you want to get information from them that will help them, but also make them feel safe. And also understanding that it's not going to jeopardize them in any way. With video recordings or even video interviews, it's always has to start with consent. Whether it's photography or video, you have to help the person to understand that, number one, they don't have to do it. And second, when they do it, this is how it's going to be used, so that they feel that they know that they're giving the information and it's going to be used in a certain way. So number one, it's always consent. Two, gaining the trust of the person and making them feel as comfortable as possible. So if they don't want the video, that's fine. But if they want the video, which after a while, when you gain that trust, you might go into that person's space the first time and you can sort of feel that they're not comfortable. Go a second time. It's, that's the thing I like about storytelling, is take as much time as possible. You definitely have to be very patient because, somebody could be very jittery in front of the camera. So, you'll say, for example, go into somebody's house, like I'll go into somebody's house. They offer you tea, have the cup of tea, let them talk, maybe they want to show you their garden or their farm. It's like, let's go to the farm, because you're in that person's space. So you have to make them feel that they can be confident and comfortable around you, so that at the time you're bringing out the camera to take a picture or record a video, they're like, okay, yeah, this is fine. So that's always the first thing. Second, when it comes to giving them their maybe the tools to document it for themselves, it's just, maybe like a simple camera or even their phones. You'll find some people who have smartphones, and just telling them, how do you feel about showing me your world through your eyes? It has nothing to do with being a professional or an amateur. It could be like, maybe in the week, you found something that was inspiring to share with other people. Could you maybe take a picture of that? Is there something, maybe it's a, say, agricultural project. Maybe there was heavy rains this time and this is how it made you feel. Could you take a picture of that? Maybe you'd planted crops and it didn't work out very well. Could you maybe document how it worked last time to this time and how that makes you feel? So in the second perspective of giving them the camera, the tool to document their own story, it's always worth the while to just let them know that it's a visual documentation of how they feel rather than an assignment. Yes, and I think to answer the question of somebody who doesn't feel comfortable with being videoed, you can always say, we're recording this video, but we will not use it. So we will use your words, we will write it down, we will change your name. Yeah, so there's many different ways to go around it.
Interesting and very, very useful. But even more practical, if you ask them to make, to self-document, so it can be a combination of photos and videos. Have you learned that one or the other is more effective for you as a human-centered designer? Maybe not for documentary making, but purely for the purpose of HCD. What is photo less interesting than video, or the other way around?
It depends on the kind of project, I would say. So if it's something, maybe documenting a project from the beginning to the end, they both work really, really well. So with photography, it could be, again, let's say maybe it's a agricultural project. So being able to see how people interact with each other in that space, maybe the community at first is like, you have been struggling to do good crops, to come up with good crops. It could be, say, a space like Machako where there's no rain. So documenting that before, whether it's through photography or film. I think the big question is, how do you want to tell that story? So it could be a book, for example, and photos do very well in books. It could be like a short documentary video or just something very simple. That's where like a video would come in, where you find people who are not, don't have enough time to read through a book or read through a report, have more interest in visual, in seeing something visually. So I would say it really, I think going into a space using photography or filmmaking, it would be, number one, what is the end goal? How do you want to tell this story? And for at least for that kind of project, how do you feel about the audience experiencing that story? Yeah.
And do you even give them instructions to either use selfie modes pointing towards them or the other way around? Does it become so practical that you give them instructions?
Yes. Again, if they have a smartphone, you don't have to. Like, I find a lot of kids nowadays are so good with phones. So if it's even like a parent who doesn't know how to use like selfie mode or the actual camera mode, their kids could do it. And it's like, have your child teach you, or have your child be the one to document that story. So in most cases you'll find that. But if it's an environment where you're going in and having to teach someone, going in with a very simple camera and just telling them, this is where you click to take a picture, showing them, like, don't shoot in front of the light, shoot, behind the light, that kind of thing. Just very simple things so that it doesn't feel like it's a big assignment. Yeah.
All right. Maybe the last topic I'd like to touch upon is the use of the content. So I understand if you record the impact of a program, it is used for impact reporting, right? And it can be used in a report, or it can be on a website or on social media. The same might apply also with video documentaries. It's meant to kind of be exposed to the big public. But what if you use the content for your design process of developing a new product or a new service or any kind of new intervention? So really use it for the purpose of designing a solution. How do you then synthesize the photo and video content? Do you show it to your design sprint team, for instance, or can you give an example of the use for a design process?
Yes. So a lot of, say, for example, from the video recordings, it would be listening, again, with going back to storytelling, listening to the user's experience, right? And seeing what they had to say. So not so much the video or showing the person's face, but maybe picking out the very key points that this person mentioned in their interview, or maybe something they said, and being like, this is something that the user has said and pointed out, and how can we focus on that? So from a video, it could be, yes, watching the video, but then picking out those key points, because the thing with an interview is you might end up with a 30-minute interview response, and maybe it's 5 minutes of that that's like really, really powerful. And the thing about being able to see that person is it connects you to them. So having that video input of like maybe the 5 minutes that made a really profound statement, it could be using that and saying that, this is what this person said. And if it's, say, for example, relating to a project in the community, say, for example, if it's an agricultural project, showing a snippet of that as well, and being like, this is the space that they want to do ABCD or plant this and that, and this is how they feel about it, with showing that space. If it's photography, one thing that I really like about the idea of photography is not just taking pictures of people, but taking pictures of the spaces that they're in. So going back to, say, a refugee situation where you're interviewing a refugee, but it's not just about taking a picture of them. It's taking a picture of like the places that they've come from. It's taking pictures of maybe the things that they have within themselves. And yeah, so I would say the two different ways that you could use them, especially for design, is definitely taking, number one, a video and saying, this is what this person said. This was really, really profound. And maybe this is the space that they're focusing on about that piece of project. So whether it's agricultural, just saying this is the farm and this is the thing that they want to do, but they cannot be able to do this. And this is how they feel they need help and support. If it's a picture or if it's a series of images, being able to show that person space. So if it's a refugee, for example, how has coming from where they've come from really impacted their lives. And it could be showing like little memoirs or things that they carried with them, and being able to say that, you know, in as much as maybe this person's life has changed or has been impacted in a very, very big way, they still have these collectibles that remind them of home.
Maybe for now, let's close off. I thank you very much for all your inputs already shared. If you are watching this video and you would like to interact with Josemarie directly and also the rest of the Proportion Global community, then do apply at proportion.global/community and join our community and these kind of wonderful sessions. Josemarie, I look forward to host you in the upcoming session and see you then. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.